while queuing up for a cup of coffee, I started talking to this person in front of me, and he actually lined up an interview with the Prime Minister of Bhutan for me during the COP the next day.
Do you ever get frustrated at the pace of change?
Totally. I always get very frustrated with the pace of change. At some point that in the climate space is especially pessimistic.
What is one misconception that you think people could have of you?
I remember missing one of my closest friend's weddings. She invited me as a bridesmaid, but I couldn't make it in the end. So she had to make immediate adjustments. What I would have chosen differently if I were to choose again.
Quick note before we start. If you have enjoyed this podcast and want to support our incredible guests, please follow Low to Grow podcast on Instagram and TikTok. Welcome to Low to Grow, the podcast transforming life's toughest moments into opportunity for growth. I'm Annie, a Forbes Under 30 technology founder whose entrepreneurship journey ran parallel to a mental health awakening. In every episode, I sit down with inspiring individuals and delve into how they managed to turn their personal or professional challenges into opportunities for growth. If you're facing uncertainty in your life, feeling down, or simply need a kick of inspiration to keep moving forward, this is your space for the honest and uplifting conversations that you will want to hear. Hit follow so you never miss an episode, and let's dive in. On this episode of Low to Grow, we have someone who truly embodies what it means to turn conviction into momentum and action. Natalie Chung is a climate advocate and social entrepreneur from Hong Kong, whose journey started really early. At just 18, she co-founded There, an award-winning social enterprise reimagining sustainable tourism as a pathway to climate education and resilience. Since then, she has carved out a remarkable global presence, earning recognition for her leadership while staying deeply grounded in service and impact. Natalie, for example, has represented Hong Kong at the United Nations Climate Conference, empowered youth voices in global negotiations, and also advised government councils on decarbonisation, whilst contributing her expertise towards organisations like the World Bank, the United Nations, and also the World Economic Forum through the Global Shapers Programme. And yes, she has even gone on an expedition to Antarctica with world-renowned ocean experts to help shape a new modern-day strategy for a carbon-neutral future. For anyone listening to this podcast who is committed to growth and meaningful contribution to society, I strongly believe that Natalie's clarity of purpose and fearless action will be an inspiring blueprint to take forward. Natalie, who do you think our conversation today will most benefit?
I think our podcast today will benefit the most everyone pursuing their passion and dreams. No matter what age you're in, what career stage you're in, you're always open and have the flexibility and freedom to take on a side interest or pursue a passion project. So everyone who's hoping to have a career transition or just to start your community and start a new hobby is welcome to join our podcast.
I am so excited to be having you on the Low to Grow podcast, Natalie. We first met when we were both knotted through a Chinese dance group, and I'm really glad that we've been able to stay in touch. And I love seeing all the posts of your life updates and your career updates as well on Instagram. You lived in Hong Kong, and that's where you were born. And then you moved to the UK to Oxford to do your master's, and now you're at Princeton doing your PhD. I'm quite curious to understand the ethos and the theme of climate and also sustainability that's always been quite central to you. What started that interest for you?
Yeah, first of all, it's so amazing to catch up here in London. It's been such a long time since we've last caught up, but I've also been seeing your amazing posts and the work that you've been championing, especially starting this new podcast. For me, I actually started discovering my passion at the early age of 11. I still remember there was a school project, and it's on the topic of what is climate change. And for that project, our primary school teacher very kindly invited a famous polar explorer in Hong Kong called Dr. Rebecca Lee. She's the first person in the world to have been to the 3 poles, which are the North Pole, South Pole, and Mount Everest. And she was sharing with us how the Earth is warming. She used a particular analogy, which is like the Earth is trapped in a microwave with continuously rising temperature at the verge of explosion. I think that imagery really stuck to my mind ever since and inspired me to care for the planet and do something to revert the warming. That was maybe 2006 and 2007. ESG or climate or sustainability was not a big or dominant theme yet. So I was just trying to gain as much knowledge as possible, reading the news internationally and looking at what exactly is global warming and how is it related to climate change and extreme weather events. So I think that kind of awareness blossomed pretty early on. But when I really took tangible action was when I reached 18, when I first went to university. During my freshman year, I joined a pitching competition right before COP21 that the Paris Agreement was signed. And before that, the French consulate in Hong Kong was trying to raise awareness among the public about climate. So they organized this pitching competition, and my team and I came up with the idea of starting a local sustainable tourism company that can help motivate people to discover biodiversity in their neighborhoods and vicinity. And we started the social enterprise called Sustainability Education, which is still running until today.
I love that. And I also love how the initiative that led you to your first social enterprise started at university. What kind of activities did you first start doing when you and your team first created there? And how has that really changed over the years?
Yeah, it seriously has been such a long journey. I can't believe it's been over, around 10 years now. Started around 2015. At the start, we were thinking to create a website that compares Hong Kong's tourist attraction and nature scenery with global attractions. Hong Kong also has these amazing hexagonal volcanic rocks that can compare to world-class destinations. Because a lot of people imagine cities as concrete jungle, like New York, London, and Hong Kong. But actually, all these cities have their own nature sanctuaries. There are so many nice parks in London, and equally in Hong Kong, actually 70% of our land is greenbelt, and around 40% of it is preserved as country parks. So we have long hit the target of 30 by 30 that globally we're talking about right now. So we really want to use these natural resources, better utilize them as educational hubs. We take students outside to nature on eco tours and curating different types of nature-based experiences. That's how we started. We started with a website with information, and we started getting more inquiries. These information are amazing, but what about actually taking us outdoors and looking at these places, having professional tour guides to do it? So the model transitioned from an online presence to offline. We started with digital content creation into physical eco tours. And now we also pivoted into different fields, including research, policy advocacy, all around climate and sustainable tourism. One of the really exciting collabs we had recently was with Disneyland in Hong Kong.
I was just going to ask you about that. I saw it on your Instagram. That's amazing.
Yeah, we actually launched it last year on World Environment Day, the 5th of June. It was an idea because I'm a big Disney fan and I've had the annual pass for maybe the past decade. Like every year I keep renewing it. But every time I go to Disney, I look at the surrounding. Although like the whole Disney land is built on land that used to be nature, but after the building of the theme park, there are also a lot of trees being preserved and imported species and biodiversity. And there are also different environmental social governance ESG initiatives around the park. For instance, Disneyland Hong Kong is the single corporate with the largest solar panel installations on top of the Small Small World attraction. So we realized that there are these interconnections. How are we able to bridge the gap between a theme park experience and an immersive nature education asset? We talked to the management at Disney to explore if they're interested in the idea of bringing children and students of different ages into the theme park to learn about sustainability. And they're really passionate about it. So we worked for around half a year to get the content creation. We co-created the syllabus with them and infused a lot of Disney element and Disney stories. One great example is there's this Moana celebration attraction in Hong Kong Disneyland. And Moana is actually a story of a girl living in the Pacific Islands facing sea level rise, issues with unsustainable fisheries. We're tying the story with the actual climate scenarios. So when people saw the celebration in the attraction, they can connect it with lived experiences and the urgency of the climate crisis. So it became a really good tool to convey these messages. And we also developed the whole syllabus around the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There were some water conservation ideas near the castle with their water storage tank recycling green water. So we tied that with the SDG on water quality. And we also tied, for example, Iron Man about industry and innovation with that SDG.
I love that. I love how you have managed to bring policy, UN SDG goals, and also interactive elements to that whole experience. And I think especially when it's targeted for a slightly younger audience, that's what will really be memorable, and that's also what they will remember as well.
And I'm sure that a lot of them go there, and if they read about their story, they will be very much inspired by you as well. Hong Kong for achieving 30 by 30. That's not the case for all countries in the world at the moment. In certain Western countries, at the moment, ESG funding is a bit lower than what they used to be. What are your thoughts on that? Because I know that at the moment, your PhD at Princeton is focused on climate-related policy. Yeah, so currently I'm doing my PhD at Princeton on climate policy. Specifically, I'm looking at how nature-based solutions help with flood risk reduction, which is like a part of climate change adaptation. I think you're right. Like in European markets, we saw some of the funding retreating from renewable energy technologies and other climate tech. And in the US, appetite on ESG funds have also been decreasing with the new administration, a lot of the legal federal changes, as well as corporate backlashing or like not committing or even retrieving their ESG targets. But I do see a trend that has been quite consistent in Asia. Companies are still very committed towards the net zero targets that they've set. And in the US, even though the overall federal government is discouraging, a lot of states are still putting a lot of work into green tech and sustainability related measures and legal frameworks, such as California, like New York City. Last month, I was at New York Climate Week, and one of the organizers from the climate group mentioned that actually before September 2025, they were really scared because New York Climate Week has been an annual event, I think, for the past 10 years. And this year, they were worried that since the Trump administration, they won't be able to do it at this scale. But in the end, they actually managed to exceed the number of events compared with last year. So we're seeing really a corporate uprising and a lot of grassroots movements happening despite the federal lack of attention or lack of funding or support. Philanthropy is filling a big gap in the space. And even in some of the UN dialogues at COP meetings, the UN climate change conferences, I was hearing how countries were thinking how to fill the gap if the US really retreat or withdraw from the Paris Agreement, which Trump has declared to do. But I think now it's still undergoing like legal procedures, like whether they actually withdraw from it. I think philanthropy will increasingly play a role in climate funding and also grassroots organizations doing re-granting, which is essentially getting a bigger grant by a nonprofit and re-granting it to indigenous communities to support their smaller projects. I think this is a trend in the philanthropy space because even in Hong Kong, a lot of philanthropic funding are quite difficult to be achieved. You have to have a very well-established track record. You have to have all the legal documents and write a complicated proposal. But if we have more organizations rechanneling these grants to smaller community organizations, that would definitely benefit the grassroots movements and help build smaller communities to support decarbonization and loss and damage. How does this affect your plans for that in the future and own plans after you finish your PhD? So Varfare, we've been a self-sustaining social enterprise for the past, I think, 3-4 years. So it's really good to see that we currently don't need to rely on any government grants or philanthropic grants to sustain our running. But in the past, maybe in the last year, it's been really difficult to get secure corporate deals because we used to do different like ESG training for companies, scientific workshops, as well as corporate branding exercises around sustainability. But now they're restricting their budgets on the spending because of the economic downturn. But we hope that this market will flourish in the next couple of years. And we're also hoping to do more on the intersection of digital technologies like AI and VR on climate education because we see a lot of digitalization in the edtech space, and potentially we could also do some hybrid format of digital and in-person experiences. In the past, there's been a surge of cloud tourism during COVID when people weren't able to travel abroad. We can bring experiences, the nature, inspirations from nature from Hong Kong to the rest of the world. I think that's also an angle that we're hoping to address. Another big focus is probably like on gender equality and women empowerment. We know that a lot of girls or women lack climate education and due to low education level, they may not be able to unleash their full entrepreneurship. So in recent years, we've also been doing more capacity building exercises for different communities, marginalized groups, nonprofits, and channeling more funds from the corporate earnings into our more charitable initiatives. So I think it's a good way to sort of redistribute resources in the society to those who are most in need and most vulnerable under the climate crisis.
Thank you for sharing that. And it sounds like you're absolutely doing incredible and also needed work. I'm so happy to hear that for the past few years, there has become a self-sustaining social enterprise. I think that's a very critical milestone for most businesses and for most enterprises. Congratulations on doing that. All the while, working on a study at Oxford and Princeton. How has it been running this social enterprise for the past 10 years whilst excelling academically?
That's a great question. I want to throw it back to you because you've also been doing this amazing startup. I think for me, time management is critical. I've been trying to balance like different commitments and roles and responsibilities. And I think it's really about spending your energy in where it's most needed. Although I'm very much a perfectionist, like growing up, I remember correcting my cursive writing, like writing it again and again to get the perfect version. But as I started to grow older, I realized that it's important to divert your energy and achieve an optimal level of commitment and energy in different projects. And don't strive for that last mile. If something's not working, take a pause and work on another project first. That enabled me to balance different priorities at different stages of life. And I'm really thankful to my co-founder as well at Fed, as he's been doing his PhD as well, but in Hong Kong. So we kind of like fill each other's gaps. I'm now focusing on fundraising because I'm not fully in Hong Kong the whole year, but I still have some established business connections and sustainability networks. A few months ago in June, we actually did a sustainability networking and meetup session organized with another two Hong Kong-based startups in New York. We were able to connect with the US market, understand the needs, and also exchange knowledge on how to run sustainability education businesses. So I think these kind of co-creation and collaboration is really good at a budding stage of an enterprise. Although at the moment we don't have plans to expand to the US per se, it's still good to form these networks and connections and see how people are doing things differently in different markets that can inspire us at our work and look at the next stage of development. So I'm really grateful for all the experiences and the opportunities that I get through studying abroad and really integrating these into our own corporation operation and fundraising.
Looking back on your journey as a co-founder for the past decade, what are some of the key lessons that you've really learned that you want to share with future budding social entrepreneurs?
One of the key lessons is definitely the importance of building a team. I think nothing would have been achieved without our team's commitment, effort, and passion. But over the years, honestly, there has been a lot of ups and downs. There were times when we had team members leaving. We also had a big pool of volunteers, and it was really difficult to engage some of them because some of them were still in university. They were interning with us. I think that kind of retainment is very important. And one of the ways that we did it was by having like individual conversation and check-in dialogues with each of the team members to understand how our mission can be aligned with their personal mission. Because this is the only way that we can nurture their personal growth and development at the same time, ensure that their skill set can be contributed to the growth and success of the social enterprise. And sometimes it's not exactly aligned. So we need to keep fine-tuning to find that right match and to continue on. Every year we recruit around 8 to 10 interns, and these interns consist of high school students as well as undergrad college students. In the past, we used to adopt this model where the interns would just do general tasks. But one year we started dividing them into different departments. So some of them were working on policy advocacy and research. Some of them are specifically working on marketing, and some of them on activity like implementation, project management. But then we realized that it may not be the best way for them to acquire different skill sets because those interns who were staying in the social media function, they were just creating like social media posts one after another, and it started to get boring in the middle of it. The next year, we learned from this lesson and we started to allow interns to switch departments. So we had them like exchange roles in the middle of the internship. And it turned out really great because they were able to acquire that interdisciplinary mindset and skill set that were really helpful in shaping their future career choices as well. Some of them stayed with us for a couple more years as a volunteer. Yeah, so I think it's important to be flexible and agile so that we can keep finding the right fit for everyone and also giving everyone a chance to develop a new set of skills instead of just focusing on honing their best existing skills. I remember for a lot of university internships, if a summer fit was over 10 or 12 weeks, corporate internship, they could rotate across different functions. This is a great way to get to know different functions of a company, helping them to find the areas that they shine in that they didn't realize. But also, I think the benefit looking back is actually an appreciation for the work done by different functions. Because I think sometimes in large corporations or maybe in the world in general, if people are quite stuck or fixated in doing something within their own department for a long time, I think it can be easy to lose perspective of the importance of other departments in that organization as well. Yeah, also the big picture thinking. Yes, for sure, definitely. With all of the functions that Jan mentioned, which are the ones that you most enjoy doing yourself personally? I feel like I actually enjoy doing strategy development a lot. For instance, for the Disney project, came up with the idea and discussed with our senior management to get the approval and buy-in. Down to the implementation details, our team actually worked really hard on it. And I'm not a particularly detail-minded person, so they actually called me up a lot on missing out like different executional details and getting me more grounded. So I think in a team, like back to your original question, it's important to have someone who dreams big, just think of crazy ideas, and another person doing more execution and fine-tuning of details to get things really done and executed in a smooth way. So I think I'm more of like the big picture person. Well, I really need someone to help me working out the details and implementing a project. But I also really enjoy policy advocacy because I think at the end of the day, we need a robust policy framework to ensure that ESG policies kind of help guide corporate decisions and drive nonprofit funding, the directions of philanthropy. So doing that is kind of like moving from here, like a grassroots organization, all the way up. Like it's a way how we gain access to government officials. I remember at the start, that was when I first got into policy advocacy because there is a recognized NGO environmental group in Hong Kong. So we started getting invited to policy consultation dialogues by the Hong Kong chief executive. We got the opportunity to come in on policy address, budget allocation, initiatives around sustainable tourism and climate policy. It really allowed us to gain insight into how policy decisions are being made and what we can do as an individual organization to help push for it. One interesting insight that I've gained across the years is that sometimes we keep asking the government to do something, but it seems that they're very reluctant to do so. And I remember one time talking to a policy official in the Environment Bureau. We were asking them, why can't we have compulsory climate education in the syllabus? It's so important. And I guess we all know how important it is. And they were saying that it was difficult for the Environment Bureau to convince the Education Bureau because there isn't a public demand. Parents are not asking schools to provide climate education to their children. So essentially, they were actually asking us as green groups or environmental action groups to develop syllabus and to trial these cases in civil society. And once we have a good case study, we can pitch it to the government again so that we can convince the Education Bureau that there's actually a need. Schools are asking for climate education, but they need the policy framework to make it happen. So that's what we've been building in the past few years, really trying to develop syllabus and proving that these are successful. We've been collecting a lot of track records and testimonials from people participating in our sustainability leadership programs, which are usually a week-long immersive sustainability tourism experience where students would go to different spots in Hong Kong, rural and urban, talk to indigenous villages about their needs around green living and about their perspectives on tourism development, and then using these insights to develop their eco-entrepreneurial idea to pitch it to the school and to the society. So I think these are good cases that we're gradually building more and more, not just us as an individual NGO, but we also collaborate with all the other green groups like World Wildlife Fund, WWF, as well as like Ocean Park Foundation, and building these small case studies so that we can gather the efforts of the civil society to make tangible policy changes upstream.
Mm. What I realized while you were talking is actually how similar what you have been doing is in a way to myself building a startup and trying to push new technology into the market. What you described about Department of Education and the Department of Environment and how there's like a tension of a chicken and egg situation of there needing to be parent demand for curriculum change in order to justify the update of this particular curriculum. It's just really similar to in our company having not just to speak to our direct customers, but also their customers. Then we get that push and pull. So like a two-pronged approach just to make sure that change actually happens, whether it's technology in my case or in the curriculum in your case. As a fellow founder, do you ever get frustrated at the pace of change?
Totally. I always get very frustrated with the pace of change. I also feel at some point that in the climate space is especially pessimistic because we're seeing these extreme weather events hitting hard to the most vulnerable communities. We saw the major flooding in Pakistan wiping out 1/3 of their settlements. There are Pacific Island countries facing sea level rise and inundation of the communities. But we're still sitting in air conditioned rooms in these climate dialogues and conferences, just keep talking and make verbal commitments without substantial changes on the ground. And people who are most vulnerable remains most affected and most vulnerable without any hopeful solution in their situation.
Mm.
This kind of climate injustice really bothers me, and sometimes I feel quite powerless in front of it. And I also felt that, well, Hong Kong is quite privileged as a city. Like, is there still a point of us doing these awareness raising exercises here? And how do we connect the Hong Kong community with the rest of the world and contribute our power to more systemic changes and transformations? I think it's a permanent struggle that we will have to live with. The world is still facing rising temperatures. Their worst case scenario seems to be playing out. What gives me hope is the communities that are still fighting on the ground. As long as we persist in our movement, we are able to start from something small and gradually progress upward to the levers or like a higher leverage point. One quote that inspired me is that every fraction of degree is a million or like thousands and millions of life stakes. Maybe we're not able to keep temperature rise within 1.5 degrees Celsius, as Paris Agreement stated, or even 2 degrees Celsius, but preventing it from rising to 3 degrees or like 3.1 degree, like every fraction of degree matters. And I think a lot of us are also switching gears towards adaptation because we know that now, like, of course, it's important to work on mitigation, but adaptation is equally important because in 10 years' time, there will be so many more climate disasters. How do we build a more resilient world so that we can future-proof our society and we can protect vulnerable communities in the future? That is also why I switched my research from mitigation to adaptation. At Oxford, I was actually working on energy decarbonization policies, looking at how complex systems, sensitive intervention points can reduce energy sector emissions in Hong Kong and Beijing. It was very interesting as a research topic. And I also think it created a certain level of change in the narratives around cost benefit analysis. We need to look further into feedback loops and accelerating the speed of change. A lot of research historically has been very focused on mitigation, but not as much research efforts have gone into adaptation yet, like finding the most cost-effective solutions to prevent disaster impact and reduce the risk of disasters. That's why for my PhD, I really hope to work in the intersection, finding out nature-based and nature-inspired solutions like mangroves and wetland restoration to support communities that don't have the money to build the billion-dollar lakes or flood walls, floodgates, to protect their communities and to support adaptation initiatives.
That's really important work. And I love how in your life overall, you're contributing towards the mitigation part by laying lots of small bricks in a way. And also then looking at the strategies for your that really driving forwards research in that area. Natalie, when you look back at your time in Hong Kong, in Oxford, and in the US, either studying really intensely or trying to build social initiatives, or for example, contributing to the World Economic Forum Global Shapers Project, what are some personal skills that you feel like you've had to develop in yourself in order to keep on delivering the best that you can to those different initiatives?
In terms of skills, I think one of the most important skills that I acquired have been making connections and being audacious with the connections. I've met a lot of people who talk about the importance of networking, both laterally and maybe upwards. But I think it's equally important to maintain the connections. I think in the past, I used to, keep connecting with different people on LinkedIn, but rarely really following up or trying to seek opportunities or seek partnerships. But over the years, as I've been in the climate space for long enough, I've realized how important it is to find our own spaces and find out opportunities or create new ones. For example, this time when I came to London, initially it was just more like visiting friends and some of my former Oxford classmates like ourselves. But I reached out to an impact investing startup that I worked with during my Oxford times, maybe like 5 years ago. I reached out to the team and looked for like collaboration opportunities. I actually like just came from their office on a new project, like a small like thought leadership piece about investing in nature and how to drive more sustainable finance capital into nature-based solutions. So I think whenever you're brave enough to reach out, I feel like a lot of more doors open. And always remember that when one door closes, another opens. I was applying for actually like Stanford and Princeton PhD. But yeah, something happened and I didn't end up going to Stanford. And at that time, I was actually really sad and really stressed because I really wanted to go to Stanford to leverage their like ecosystems, and I wanted to learn more about climate tech in the VC space. And at Princeton, I felt that it was a more academic institution, so maybe it limited my opportunity to access these networks. But then I guess like looking back, it's not a decision to be regretted because Princeton still had really good network. And the proximity to New York allowed me to be connected with the space there. Even like while I was interviewing for the Net Hennessy Scholarship at Stanford, I actually made a good network there. So I could still be connected with the fellow scholarship recipients or other scholarship finalists. So I think like making use of these I would call like residual networks. They may not be very immediate, may not be my immediate classmates or circle, but these people who maybe have helped you or supported you along the way, if you're able to maintain a connection or to reach out, I think there's always something that will reap out of it. And there are these like serendipitous encounter that actually blossoms into something bigger.
For sure. I really love how you coined the term residual network. It's so lovely. And it's true, it's just people that you come across. Maybe there was a good feeling when you did meet them that first time. And then if you just keep in touch every now and then. And I think opportunity comes from very unexpected places. And I think in business and in government and in policy, that's always the case.
Yeah. I think one of the coolest experiences I had was at COP29 in Azerbaijan. I was tasked to film a documentary for RTHK Radio Television Hong Kong called Climate Insight. So essentially, we're documenting stories in COP29 about negotiations related to the China delegation, as well as the Green Belt and Road Initiative happening between China and Azerbaijan. We had a previous series in Dubai at COP28 and also featuring climate adaptation stories in Fiji. And actually, the Fiji series came out of an internship that I did back during my Oxford time at WWF in Singapore. It was a remote sustainable finance internship, but that former internship supervisor actually moved to Fiji working at the UN development program in Suva. So I reached out to him asking, we really want to do a documentary in Fiji because we want to showcase the islanders and people who are facing the frontline climate crisis. How do they view sea level rise? How are they protecting their villages and indigenous cultures and communities? And it worked out just because of this like internship boss that I've never met in person, only met online over like 2 months of internship. We moved to Fiji and then we met in Fiji in person. So I think that was super interesting. And again, the same in Azerbaijan. I met this person while queuing up for a cup of coffee at one of the pavilion. And I started talking to this person in front of me. And he happens to be one of the coordinators in Bhutan. And he actually lined up an interview with the Prime Minister of Bhutan for me during the COP the next day. So we were able to get this high-level policy figure to speak on our program to the Hong Kong audience about the connections between Bhutan and potentially Hong Kong, because Bhutan is a carbon negative country and they have this network called the G0 countries, which are essentially like countries that have already achieved carbon neutrality and carbon negativity. And they were thinking a lot on the lines of creating like forest carbon credits and selling it to other nations who are still very carbon intensive, like Hong Kong or the US. So I think these are like really chances that appear out of nowhere, but if you're able to make good use of it, I think it really benefits your career and help you navigate this complex and interconnected world.
How do you stay so composed when you're speaking with world leaders or when you're, representing a really important and meaningful initiative at places such as COP?
Well, I guess just like you, I feel like you're so calm and composed. I'm having your podcast series.
I feel like I'm like a duck in water, like okay from the top, but then under the water, I'm, sometimes frantically kindly.
Yeah, I mean the same for me. Actually, during my TEDx talk in Hong Kong 2 years ago on climate resilience, we had to face the audience, like over 1,000 audience in the theater, and I was really nervous on the stage. I didn't expect it because I've practiced this group maybe like 100 times. But then I remember like after speaking the first line, my mind went completely blank and I forgot the rest of my script. And we also didn't have a teleprompter. I was about to cry because my mother was on the first row and she actually saw my like tears bubbling, like just, yeah, in my eyes. But then all of a sudden the lights came back and I continued talking like normally.
Wow.
And very thankfully, the team cut out my blank moments on stage, the stage fright part in the final YouTube video. So it ended up looking good. But yeah, I think, I mean, that's probably a metaphor for the rest of our lives. A lot of the times we do encounter difficulties, but we become so filtered on social media. So everyone only sees the successful sides. People see that YouTube video and thought my speech went smoothly, but the fact is it was actually a lot of stuttering. It was just cut out. This is also what I feel in recent years when social media became more central to our daily lives. I think we tend to believe that everyone's life is perfect, but actually everyone has their own struggles that we're not able to see in the glamorous social media world. Sometimes I also feel guilty for sort of perpetuating that narrative that everything is perfect. So I tried like sharing more vulnerable stories and stories of failures. Um, and I realized that it actually resonated a lot better than just showing your perfect selves. But equally, like sometimes you just need to share some content for business purposes, like you're promoting an event, it has to be positive. So I think it's still very nuanced. I'm still trying to find a way to be better at sharing vulnerabilities and be better at like just sharing challenges, finding common grounds with other people. And I think this podcast is a great outlet for us to discuss more intimate issues like mental health and how does one become more resilient mentally and to overcome these challenges in life.
Thank you for sharing that story about your mental health stage. I think you sharing that so openly on this podcast will really inspire a lot of listeners, especially those who might in their own heads think that, I'm not a good public speaker. But I think in the end, it's always just go forward. And if a challenge comes up, just believe that, you will be able to overcome it and that the world won't be empty on that front. Picking up on a point that you mentioned just now, what do you think is the biggest failure that you have had to date? And what did you learn from that?
I think maybe if you asked me a year ago, I would have said not getting into Stanford was my biggest failure. Reflecting on that, I think a more personal, maybe failure, not really failure, but like I think misplaced of priority was this very decision to pursue a PhD in the US without substantial planning around my personal relationships and networks. For one, like I'm an only child and I already like did this 2-year master's in Oxford. And I think I didn't communicate thoroughly with my parents before applying for the PhDs. And then I literally just told them, oh, I got this offer. I'm going to the US for 5 years and just leaving home all of a sudden. I think that wasn't a good decision. It could have been more well planned. And I did make a lot of sacrifices in terms of like family time and my relationships and communities in Hong Kong. And I think in terms of my social enterprise, it also hit a little bit because I was carrying a lot of the networks and external relations, and me sort of suddenly exiting the scene did affect our businesses. So I think I guess it's still an ongoing process. So I wouldn't call it like a retrospective failure, but maybe an ongoing failure or an ongoing challenge that I need to tackle. How do I better manage these relations and make an optimal decision between pursuing goals or being ambitious about something versus just mentally grounding myself and dedicating time to people that I care and love. I think I did sacrifice a lot of maybe friendships and personal relationships along the way. I've been away a lot and maybe not there for my friends' important moments. I remember missing one of my closest friends' weddings. Initially, she invited me as a bridesmaid, but I couldn't make it in the end. So she had to make like immediate adjustments. Maybe I would have chosen differently if I were to choose again, because some things that are lost cannot be retrieved. But I feel like money you can still earn back, or some of the work, or some of the, say, like fame, or like these very superficial like accolades that we're trying to claim are so transient. And I started to lose sight of the true meaning of happiness, like in some parts of my life. And in the past few years, I think it's been a lot of these like external factors may grant me very short term happiness or joy, but I think relationships is still what gives me persistent joy, like having a community to count on, having intimate friend circles. Yeah. So I think this is one thing that I kind of regret along the way. And I hope that I'll be able to do better, like catching out with friends and being there for them when they need it the most.
I love what you said just there. And I was also thinking because I guess we're all of a similar age. I think what you described there is something that a lot of people go through in their 20s for women as well, because, women haven't worked for that long. I think there are still certain social biases towards what women should or shouldn't be doing. I think it can be quite challenging to be a woman who is just focusing on her career. I'm really glad that you mentioned, just the sacrifice of relationships. I think I've also shared a similar, I guess, mental struggle to an extent. What I've learned is that, again, similar to you, the conclusion is relationships are so important. And I'm so grateful to all the family and friends who have allowed me to come in and out of their lives and just always be there when I do want to speak to them. And I've also learned actually that in the end, friendships is about the quality, not the quantity.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is so, I guess just so different to when, for me, anyway, in my early 20s, when, I was just super interested in getting to know a lot of people. And then now I actually realize, hang on, it's actually who do I actually enjoy spending time with and learn from. And it's a small handful of people.
Yeah, totally. Maybe that resonated so much.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
I feel like everyone our age or like in our shoes might be facing similar struggles.
You are quite a positive, visible public figure. What is one misconception that you think people could have of you?
That's an excellent question. I think one thing is definitely my social persona. On my channels like LinkedIn, Instagram, I tend to portray this sustainability image, like a very consistent, just talking everything about climate and sustainability. And I think some people who have never met me before would think that I only talk about sustainability. They will only see that persona, but they don't know the fact that I'm curating a certain persona because of business needs, because I need to fundraise, because I need to, like gain more research collaboration opportunities. That's why I'm sharing my work, but that's not the entirety of me. And a lot of people would just assume that I'm this particular, like very sustainable person, and they wouldn't talk to me if they are not fully aligned with the agenda, or they would be worried to reach out to me as a friend. So I think this has prevented a lot of people from getting to know me on a deeper level. They would have a lot of assumptions on who I am. And also, most recently, I think I also carry this baggage of being an environmental advocate or a climate advocate. Last year, I did a TV interview in Hong Kong. I talked about my journey, like my social enterprise, and also what we're doing on reducing carbon emissions and what everyone can do on the individual levels. Obviously, like consuming less meat and sometimes even like flying less because flying is carbon intensive. And that line got quoted massively on online forums, and I got a lot of attacks by people like criticizing my old traveling behavior because obviously I study in the U.S. and I travel between Hong Kong and the U.S., which I do feel very guilty about, even with the offsets. But I do think that environmental field is quite particular in the way that if you champion something, people expect you to live up to that. People expect you to live the most organic life and, you know, like be a complete vegan, don't fly at all, and don't change clothes. Like people have all these expectations on the perfect environmentalist. And I think this is also the very notion that prevented a lot of people into environmentalism because they have this Puritan expectation. If you need to be an environmentalist, the bar is this high. And if you're not there, you're not environmentalist enough. I think this guilt trapping is really damaging the movement because everyone has their own needs and has their own ways of pursuing environmentalism. Like maybe some people, they have cultural or behavioral restrictions and they cannot practice a fully vegan diet. Some people have families in elsewhere. They might be diaspora and they cannot not travel to meet their family. So I think everyone has these different personal circumstances that prevent us from being a very perfect environmentalist. So I think this is one thing that people have this misconception around true environmentalists and what it means to care for the environment. Well, so now like I wouldn't guilt trap anyone for the behavior. Of course, like there are bigger systemic change we should all pursue. And I think we should all try within our capabilities and abilities to be as friendly to the environment as possible. I mean, whenever I buy products, I try to look for secondhand items and cruelty-free vegan cosmetics, etc. But at the same time, we should also take into account everyone's different circumstances and try to be more forgiving and pursuing the common goal of tackling systemic changes like the fossil fuel industry and brainstorming ways to pursue deep decarbonization pathways for different sectors, but at the same time, like be mindful and conscious of our behaviors. I really like a quote that says, we don't need one perfect environmentalist, but we need 8 billion of imperfect environmentalists. So if everyone can do something a little bit better, we're competing against ourselves. Like maybe yesterday I'm having like veggie diet once a week. And next year I can set a target of having 2 veggie meals a week. That would already be an improvement and one step towards a better planet.
I actually didn't know about that before you said about how being sustainable and being an environmentalist is personal and that the only competition is yourself and it shouldn't be attacking other people. Kind of made me think of going to a gym and kind of like gym instructors always say, eyes nowhere else and only think about yourself. You're not competing against anyone else and how many ways you can live because it's your own body and it's so unique. Natalie, thank you so much for sharing all of your experiences. I'm going to ask you the podcast staple, which is what do you think is one thing that will allow more people to have better mental health?
One thing that can allow people to have better mental health is stopping doom scrolling. I think in the past couple of years, like TikTok is going viral. Everyone is just scrolling like nonstop, looking at other people's lives and trying to pursue that and feeling missing out, like FOMO. And I think stopping that and really using that time to reflect on yourself, be more mindful, go for a walk in nature. Every time when I go on a hike, I'm a big hiker. I feel that nature is so vast and human is so insignificant, and all of our struggles becomes minimal because the world is so much bigger. There's a saying that my friend used to say to me a lot: the sky is big enough to hold all your tears and fears. So just look up to the sky and think of the whole world, the universe that's so vast. We don't have to focus on our own struggles that much because when you look back at like a not perfect grade that you got in your first grade, you don't even remember it. I remember of struggling so much and trying to be the first in the class when I was in elementary school, but now like nothing matters. Like your public exam scores, nothing really matters now. It's just about how you're living your life and how you feel every day. Being present, being in the moment, and really finding joy in the little things in life and being appreciative and grateful. I would recommend everyone to keep a gratefulness journal or a list of things that make you happy. I recently read this article saying that you can create a dopamine list, some small things that can, like give you some positive energy.
Oh, I love that.
You can just like maybe 10 things. Go for a nature walk or draw, like pick up your pen, write a poem, or like, get a matcha. Just keep that list and pick one thing to do when you feel really down, and then your world will be like a little bit better.
Oh, so then I have to ask you, what's your top 3 things on your daily list?
I literally just read this article, so I don't think I have one now. But on top of my mind, I would say first, hiking. I love organizing group hikes with a lot of friends from different backgrounds and industries, and I usually organize group hikes every time when I'm back in Hong Kong. And as I did my reflections for 2024, I was trying to find one time, the single moment that I felt the happiest. I was surprised that it wasn't, say, like getting a Princeton offer or getting a scholarship. It was actually the day of the hike.
Oh,
So I was like,
that's lovely.
yeah, I should actually do that more. And I think second thing is probably painting. I love Chinese painting, and my mom is learning it right now, so our feet together. And third thing, it may be just calling a good friend and sharing my life with them.
Oh, I love that.
What about yours?
Yeah, I think for me, it's reading, first of all. I think even if I'm quite stressed or feeling quite emotional or angry or, whatever.
What kind of book, though? Fiction
Any
or
type of
self-help book?
Any type of book, honestly. So I only read fiction up until I was about 18. And then somehow over uni and after uni, I really got into biographies. And actually the book written by the founder of Nike, Phil Knight, it's called Shoe Dog, was the one that I read just before finishing uni that actually inspired me to go into entrepreneurship. Oh, wow. So hugely meaningful. But I do find that, even if I'm in a very emotionally heightened state, if I read anything, I can calm myself down. And I also really enjoy that process. My second thing would also be similar to you. It's just being outside in nature. I love going for walks and I love just being in the countryside or being by the ocean and being able to gaze at this really vast expanse of space. And I find it really, really soothing. And then my third one would be, I think, just hanging out with a really close friend or family member.
Nice. So second and third ones are the same.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, Natalie, thank you so much for your time today. I'll definitely have to hit you up for one of the hikes when I'm in Hong Kong.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time and creating this space for people to speak out of their mental health challenges and also our journey to growth.
Thank you for listening. You excited for the next episode? Follow Low to Grow Podcast on Instagram and TikTok to keep in touch with the new announcements. That's a wrap for today's episode of the Low to Grow Podcast. If it resonated with you, leave a review and hit follow to help more people to find important conversations. Keep growing and see you next time.